Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Business Roundtable podcast. I am one of your hosts here, David Carr of Steward Your Business, where I help business owners and their teams in organizational health, helping them to be leaders of themselves and helping lead their teams. So we've got a great roundtable for you tonight. Before we get into our topic, though, I'll go through and have everybody introduce themselves. We'll start with Bil Hatch. Bill?
Hey, Bil Hatch here, leadership guide and podcaster, as the little sign says. I podcast under the banner of Bald Spots Productions, and where we have a wide variety of interviews and roundtables. And I'm working on my leadership book. I figure I'm about halfway through with the organizational part. So
there we go. Thanks, Bill. Glad to have you back again. And Charlie, welcome.
Thank you, David. Thanks for having me back. My name is Charlie, the cybersecurity specialist of our roundtable here. And for the older folks, almost like the detective, Charlie Chan, off by one letter. Anyhow, our commitment is to deliver peace of mind to the businesses, the small to mid-sized businesses that we serve, all while doing it with a 5-star world-class client experience that you don't typically associate with IT help desk people.
All right. Thanks, Charlie. Glad to have you back. And we've got John here, who I've gotten to work with over the years. And I'll let John introduce himself and give you a little bit of his background. We're glad to have you here.
Great. Well, it's good to be with you, David, and the team, Bill and Charlie. And my name is John Cruikshank. I'm the CEO of a company called JMC Squared. It's a civil and structural engineering company based in Los Angeles, but we do work all across the country. And also, I know our topic is going to get into effective communication and leadership. And so I'll also add for the group that I'm currently the mayor in the city of Rancho Palos Verdes, and I'm currently a candidate for Los Angeles County Supervisor. So some of those two organizations might come into play on this great topic that you have for us today, David. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We're glad to have you here. And yeah, I mean, we've been talking about communication and some boundaries over the last couple episodes of our podcast. And over the last few weeks, just the clients I've been working with, how do we effectively manage our team, particularly like in checking in with them and delegating wisely, leading them, essentially how we lead ourselves. So, this theme is where we're going to be focusing on tonight. And we'll be talking about personal stories and challenges and rewards, particularly as business owners ourselves. How have we navigated those challenges? Because we all know as business owners, we have to delegate. We cannot do all things. That's not effective or sustainable. And so, I think we'll just start with the concept of kind of the art of delegation, because this is really, really key. And understanding what that is, how do you delegate, defining it here, and why it's important in team management, and emphasizing the balance of control and trust there. So maybe Charlie, I'll just ask you to start with us a little bit, because you work with a team in the cybersecurity world, supporting them. But what would you say, kind of for you, what would you define delegation as from your perspective?
Well, yeah, absolutely. So regardless of how well you hire in terms of bright people with the right culture fit, it's still gonna feel like pulling teeth and just almost painful to have to delegate at first, because what takes, maybe something that you could do in your sleep, it takes you a ton more effort to ensure that you pass it off to somebody else who's going to do it with excellence. And so just embracing the fact that it's going to be 30 times harder to get somebody else leveled up to do something that you could do without even thinking, has helped, me personally, to embrace the delegation and understand, like you said, that it's not sustainable if we are constantly the bottleneck. And so learning to develop others and invest in our people and putting the time, energy, and patience to level them up, and also putting together good documentation and process flows so that way decision making doesn't get bottlenecked to us.
Mm-hmm. Bill, I want to ask you this question because you're talking about writing your leadership book, but in delegation, can you talk to a little bit about in there's a balance of controlling and trusting those in which you're delegating to.
Mm-hmm.
You could just talk a little bit about that as from a leadership perspective. How do you do that in delegating?
Well, as Jim Collins said, get the right people on the bus. I've also heard it said, get the right people on the right seat on the bus. But I've always been, I've always leaned more toward the laissez-faire style of leadership than the micromanaging side of things. And, it's always for me been about finding the right people, the people who can do the job without much supervision, because there are always things that the leader has to do that don't provide time to do the other things. That's why you delegate, is because to go with an early example of my leadership experiences, I was in charge of Cal Poly's Rose Float Committee, and because I was able to get the right people into their positions, I was able to go and deal with things like with the school's risk management, with OSHA, both Cal OSHA and the school's OSHA, with media and tournament and all the other things that most people don't know you have to go through to get a rose float to go down Pasadena Boulevard on the 1st of January.
Yep.
And so yeah, in some ways I agree with Charlie. It can certainly be pulling teeth to get that first delegation out, but once you get used to delegating those things and you see that the job gets done well, it gets a lot easier to do. Even though you may not have any teeth left, you're starting to eat oatmeal. So,
well, let me come to John, because this is something John and I worked on, and I think very effectively. John, like, what are the benefits of getting that delegation done effectively, right? Because I know that is so important in working with you and your organization and getting the right. We got the right people in the right spots. Okay, that's like important. But then it's like, okay, how do we, delegate that? How have you seen that, John, affect productivity or team member growth or engagement? What's been your experience? Or it could talk about the city as well, for that matter.
No, I mean, I love talking about my company, and having delegation is clearly important, like Charlie and Bill just talked about. It's hard at first. It's hard to give up what you love to do and what you can do well to others that maybe don't have the same skill set, but you want them to be as good as you. And I think what I've realized is that nobody's the same as any of us. And so we have to play to people's strengths and weaknesses. And what we found in my company, where we have 2 different departments, I need to rely on the department heads to be able to not only run their departments, but also communicate with each other and teach each other as well. So you're not only helping delegate to them, but you're teaching them how to delegate as well, because that is a difficult thing. And I think for me, I think the one thing I try to emphasize is that, just like we've been saying, that they're not going to be exactly like you. Don't expect people to be exactly like you. Let them be who they are and guide them in the ways that maybe they have some weaknesses, and just be patient. Patience is a hard thing as a business owner, because you do have a lot of clients that are breathing down your neck. They're calling you when there's a problem. They don't necessarily call your employees. I mean, they might start at your employees, but you don't want them yelling at your employees either. And then I guess the other side of it is, in today's competitive world for great employees, you want to make sure their jobs are fulfilling. So if you're always taking tasks away from them and you're always just saying, I'll just take care of it and do it myself, then you're
Mhm.
taking away what they're there for, and that's to grow as a professional. And so you not only think of it from your perspective and the company's perspective, you got to think of it in terms of what their job growth is and what they're looking for. And the best people are always the ones that want to continue to grow. So it's a challenge, but it's a challenge worth taking.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, so we talked about a little bit about these, but I want to dig a little bit deeper into some of these common maybe pitfalls that you might fall into when you're delegating, especially when you're new, like you said, John, you're like, I want to delegate, but I just don't know how to do this well. So I like us to kind of think a little bit about where have you been in that, and John, well, all of us are consultants in some way or some form or fashion. And I'll just start with one of mine, and then maybe I'll come back to you, Charlie. Is I would delegate a task, and I knew how much time it would take me to do the task, and either I would delegate to that amount of time, or I wouldn't even tell the time because I just kind of in my mind figured I knew the time. Like this is the task, and I would delegate the task, and I didn't tell the person like how much time it should take. So inevitably, it took longer, and or much longer than I anticipated. I'm like, holy moly, I didn't expect you're going to take that long to do the task, but the pitfall was I didn't articulate how much time I thought the task would take, and they didn't tell me either. They just took the task and ran with it. Like, okay, I'll do the task. So I just want you guys, and I would love to go round robin here, and you may have multiple ones, but just to speak to a particular pitfall to be aware of when you're delegating to somebody. So Charlie, I'll just start with you.
Yeah, David. So the biggest pitfall I try to be conscious of is letting the team members that I'm delegating to let them know what needs to be done, what needs to be accomplished, and not getting so attached to the how-to portion because from the beginning we should have already focused on bringing in talent, right?
Mm-hmm.
Rock star hunting, right? So if we're bringing in rock stars, don't tell a rock star how to do something, right? We want to let them know what needs to be done when it, like you said, timing, when you need it done by, and get the heck out of the way. Go pick up their dry cleaning, right? So that's what the pitfall. I oftentimes get so attached because I tend to get into the weeds and I get so attached on how I want things done to maybe it's actually less efficient than what they could, a different method that they know of or they could come up with. So that's a pitfall that I've
So it
noticed.
would I'm just gonna ask quite to clarify, Charlie. So I hear what you're saying, maybe not get so much into the weeds. Would it but it'd be beneficial for them to come who you're delegating to perhaps then just say, here's my plan of like you could tell them, Charlie, like I'm not trying to dictate every little step. This is what needs to
Right.
get done.
Yeah.
But hearing them then tell you their plan, like here's what I would propose to do, so that
Right.
you're like as a leader, you're just verifying or approving their process rather than trying to
Exactly.
manage them and say,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, so have them come back. Yeah, definitely. Have them come back with you with what they feel is the plan of attack. So that
Hmm.
way you could inspect what you expect and also at the same time not be spoon feeding them to where they're going to always be expecting you to tell them exactly every step of the way, because then you're doing them a disservice, kind of like what John talked about. Like, that's not fulfilling if you're just showing up as an order taker. Like, you want to come and you want to add your creative juices and your capabilities and be able to step up and figure stuff out. And so that you're taking the joy away from them if you don't allow them that space, that creativity, that and have their voices be heard and their input to be valued and to be considered.
Hmm.
So absolutely,
Okay.
100%. Yeah.
Thanks. I'm going to come to you, John, next. Just, again, common pitfalls that you see, particularly small business owners, but could be anybody that in delegating to their team or others that you've seen or experienced yourself.
Well, I mean, in our business, which is a service business, many times we give a price to our clients to complete a project. And so it's not like your employees have an unlimited amount of time to actually complete a project because You obviously, the quicker you do it and the more efficiently you do it, you make more money. And on the flip side, of course, if they're taking way longer than you estimated, you lose money. So, but here's the pitfall that I've fallen into, even after all these years of being in business, that sometimes I get too busy and I stop to I at the beginning of a project, you really want to make sure that you tell your employees, what the actual goal is of that project. Like, where is it do we need to be at the finish line? What is it, the product that we're providing? Because inherently all employees, and engineers, I should more say engineers, because I don't know if this is true in other industries, but engineers love to please everybody. And so then they make friends with clients, and the client will tell them, hey, okay, can you go ahead and add this retaining wall and design this pool over here? And by the time you're done, the little project that you had this little fee for ends up being this huge project you still have this little fee for. So I think it's very important to make sure you teach your employees how projects are run, because they're going to need that skill as well. I've had plenty of people that have worked for me over the years, and they were wonderful when they worked for me. And then when they said to me, I'm leaving to start my own company, honestly, I felt bad that I was losing them, but I felt even better that they are going to go off and do something on their own. And I was very proud of them. So I think we have a responsibility too, as business owners, to think about the growth of our employees, and the best way to make sure you do that is to give them guidance throughout the project, and not just to say, hey, just go do this, but tell them, maybe say, here's what it is, what do you think we should be doing, and get their ideas as well. Because the path to get to the end of a project, many times your employees can figure out a better mousetrap and a better way to do it. Even though we think we're great at what we do, sometimes they have better ideas. And even if they don't have a perfect idea, many times the idea is you can utilize them and just make everyone's life better at the company. So I think that's the one pitfall. We want to make sure that we don't just let them go off in the pasture alone, but to help them along and guide them along.
Yeah. Well, I think, John, as you talked about it, and this is talked about in the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, talking about begin with the end in mind, knowing what's the end goal. And I've just like you, John, I've fallen into that pitfall of I knew myself, but I didn't articulate it clearly to the person. Like, what is the end goal? What's the objective? What would be the desired outcome here? Like, it was crystal clear in their mind. They understood it. If I had a document, or like John, maybe engineering drawing or something like, here's what the completed one should look like. This is, the
Right.
ideal picture, right? But if we don't paint that picture, we just kind of point them in the direction, they could be off target, especially if they didn't have much more time, they land somewhere else and they come back to you. I've used all the budget, John. Here it is. You're like, that's
Right.
not.
I have nobody to blame but myself in that regard. I mean, companies like ours, you need project managers that are helping guide people to what the end product is, and then let them use some creativity, like Charlie was talking about. You don't want to tell the rock star how to play that riff. I mean, they get it. I mean, they can do solo stuff, but you also need to have some guardrails and some boundaries, and because at the end of the day, you're giving a client a product that they're paying for, and
Yeah.
and so you need to give them the guidance to get there.
Right. How about you, Bill? What are give a common pitfall that you've seen in delegating?
Oh wow. Wow, Charlie and John took the good ones.
That's what we do.
Or how you've been delegated to? Maybe somebody that
No.
has. Yeah.
Well, in my experience, what John was saying is absolutely true, in that, especially when different departments are making different pieces of the end product, is to make sure everyone understands what that end goal is, what that end product may be. Whether it's a civil engineering project with a retaining wall that doesn't need a pool, or some kind of widget, that can do, but one pitfall that does come to mind is expectations. That if you step in to do things that you don't think they're doing right, then your people are going to start expecting you to do that all the time.
Mm.
And you can't do that. If you're in charge, if you're the supreme leader, you have a lot of other things on your plate. And if you keep going in and fixing drawings or fixing charts or whatever it is that needs to get fixed, then the people down line are going to expect, oh, well, I don't have to worry about this. Bill's going to come in and do it. Run into that with M&O, which I'm currently working with. It's like there's always the temptation to go in and fix what the group isn't doing right. But if you do that once, then they're always going to expect you to do it. So you have to trust your people. You have to trust your leadership to do what's right, to do the things that are best, even if you get accused of being a micromanager.
well, and that's
even
a good
when you're
transition.
not.
I want to get into a little bit of that too, but how do we check in? How do we, without being micromanaging? And I'll come back to you, Bill, because I think this is you raised this issue. But how do we, we've delegated, right? But how do we, we need to check in on the progress at some point, and like you were mentioning too, John. But what does that look like, Bill? And maybe just talk about some scenarios. I want to think about different projects or things, because there's some tasks that are very quick to do, and then we have projects that could last months or even years, depending on what the project is. So there's varying levels, I think, of check-ins, and so I'd like to give you guys' feedback on what does that look like, so that we're supporting the team and we're getting we're successfully completing the project or the task and keeping the morale up, the engagement up. So Bill, I'll start with you first, and then we'll go from there.
Okay. Well, one thing I like using are checklists. It's really simple. These are the things that need to be done. This is when they need to be done by. And you can set it up now. I mean, especially now, you can set it up in such a way that you can look at these checklists without the person ever really even knowing. I mean, not that you should sneak around and do this stuff, but, it's like, hey, you know what? I can look and see, oh, okay, great. Charlie's done with his checklist. So we can move on to the next phase of the project. There's a few things here that John hasn't completed. Let's see if he's having any difficulty with these particular tasks and where we can get him the help he needs. And that way, if you have a checklist done up in advance, at the very beginning, then it becomes, okay, this is just a natural part of the order, of how it works. And that's how I like doing it, because I don't like being accused of micromanaging. It's an arrow through the heart.
Yeah, I hear you. No, I think that's a great tool, especially for routine types of projects and things you do all the time. You've gone through yourself developing that checklist, all those steps, so that way you would even talk without, like what I hear you saying, without even talking to the person, you could literally, if they maintain their checklist, you could literally look at their checklist and say, like, okay, they've got this, and if they're obviously missing something, that would be your cue to, like, I need to call them, I need to get a hold of them and find out what's going on here, what's the problem with you not completing the checklist.
What's the opportunity for improvement?
Opportunity for all right.
We don't have problems. But yeah, I even have checklists for I even have a checklist for myself. And every day, I can go to the days section of the checklist, and boom, it's like A, B, C, D, done. And I can get onto the more difficult things.
Yeah, well, we don't have Curtis on here tonight, but he'd be preaching processes and systems, and that would probably be in there, Bill. I work with John, particularly because we were, like I mentioned earlier, Deltec Vision is a very robust system. That's just one of many. But I think, I know, John, I'd love to get your input on this. That's just checklist, but it's just in this idea of a regular check-in. What does that look like? How is that successful? And maybe the different types of check-in based on, we talked about different team members maybe, because you work on a variety of different folks. As the owner of the company, you're working with, administrative people, technical people. Talk to a little bit about what does that look like for you?
Sure. Well, I 100% agree with Bill in regards to checklists. I love them. Unfortunately for me, as I've got several different irons in the fire, being on my city council, running a company, and running for another office, things change so quickly that I can't keep up with a checklist. So here's what I've done, because engineering is an interesting profession, because you're not just dealing with your internal staff and people that are creating calculations and plans and construction documents, but you're also dealing with different subcontractors and consultants that you need information from, like soils engineers and others, surveyors, and then of course the client and architects, of course, too. So you've got a whole wide variety of people that you rely on information being done in a fairly timely manner. People that are developers, they don't have a lot of patience for projects just sitting there while they're paying huge monthly fees on their loans. And so the stress level can get fairly high, especially if you're the one on the critical path being badgered to get your stuff done tomorrow or tonight or whenever. So what I've done is I actually have a person, and they're primarily an overhead staff, but it's a true coordinator. And this person has a personality. And David, you of course know, you work with Daisy and you've talked to her many times, but
Yep.
she has a personality that she can't stand it when things are sitting around not getting done. And so pretty much every email that goes out to my staff that I expect something done, she's copied on that. So I know that when she's copied on that, she's going to take the necessary steps to make sure it gets done. Because as we all know, everyone responds differently. Some people, when you see an email, they'll get it done, but they'll ignore phone calls. Or some people, only take phone calls and they'll ignore emails or texts or whatever it is. So everyone has different ways to communicate and motivate. Like some people just aren't motivated by certain things. And so she understands each one of my employees' ticks, if you will, what gets them going and what doesn't motivate them. And also with our clients, she gets to know the clients and understand them, and motivates them, whether it be getting payment, whether it be getting signed contracts or whatever it is. So I feel that a real good way to checking in is to have someone on your team that helps you do that check-in, especially when I don't have the time to be always following up. So I know when she's copied, it's going to get done. And if it's not getting done, she'll elevate it back to me so that I can make that phone call and find out what's going on. But that doesn't happen very often. So that's the sort of thing that works really well for me in terms of tasks.
Yeah, I think that's great, John. Yeah, and have been working with your team, and it is really important. And I think you alluded to this too, Bill, that you get you two are getting the right people in the right place. They do respond differently, and some people are focused and motivated differently. So I think, John, like getting that person, particularly your level, like you said, I need that kind of that oversight and helping me. And knowing when to call in when do you need that assistant, when do you need that help, instead of just trying to do it yourself. So relying on those team members really, really critical. And that helps you then again, John, not having to micromanage because it's being brought up to you. So you're like, oh, great.
That's not my personality to micromanage.
Yeah.
Like I'm one of those more trusting people. Unfortunately, in the world, I probably trust more than I should. I always tell people I was born in the wrong era, where handshakes were good enough for a contract. But I learned very early on that wasn't good enough. And I had a real tough architect client back in the late 90s. And I remember one time coming back to them and saying, man, I did all this extra work for you. And you said you do this, this, and this for me. And the owner of the company looked at me and said, is it in writing? I'm like, no, we agreed to it on the phone. He's like, if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. Sorry. You just learned a lesson, and hung up on me.
Wow.
I mean, it was pretty nasty. But honestly, I'm glad I learned that lesson early on. And unfortunately, you really do need to trust but verify, as they say.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to get your input, Charlie, especially because your IT background, if you're good with this, because there is different tools and technologies, and maybe go in a little deep here. But what have you seen being effective, especially in we are so varied in our generations right now. I mean, like you said earlier, like what people respond to, John, and what are you seeing, Charlie, that is working successfully for teams and organizations, if they're leveraging these tools, a checklist, whether just feedback on that, because I know sometimes there's a tendency maybe to make it overly complicated, which then people don't use either. Where's that middle ground for business owners and teams?
Yeah. So I love what both Bill and John brought up, because that's absolutely necessary in everything that we do. Documentation, documentation, documentation. So we have a saying: if it's not in a ticket, it doesn't exist. And so, because we're all juggling different tasks all the time, if we can't go in and search for the ticket to see what was done and what wasn't done, then there's no way for us to backtrack and figure out how we troubleshoot a certain issue, how we solve a certain issue. And so, speaking of checklists, we have preset templates with all the things of the commonly done tickets already in our ticketing system. So all they have to do when they start a ticket is just load that template. And then obviously, if there's little nuances for a specific client or the specific person that they're working with, they can modify the checklist, and also putting in their time entry and documenting their time properly, and that goes back to holding people accountable to actually do that. Same thing with projects. Put out what the steps are, put the estimate of number of hours it's going to take, and then put in your actual time entry so that you can actually gauge what was proposed versus what was the actual. Because without documentation, without tracking, there's no way to run a business. And so, absolutely, and just at the end of the day, holding people accountable, because if people are not held accountable for doing these things that are standard best practices and operating procedures, they're not going to do it. And so, if you start docking them, if you just write them up, do whatever it takes. And obviously we incentivize people too. We do shout outs. So we do have a system where we give what we call wow points to each other for recognizing people that are going above and beyond, not just showing up and doing their job, but like actually making an effort to make the team better and raise the standards. So
well, I think you raised some good things about tracking and what that looks like. I mean, checklists, we've talked about some different systems. I've mentioned Delta Vision is one. I think it is important to do that, to have something to track like you're talking about, Charlie, because where I've run into problems, and this is where I've run into problems in the past, and this isn't per like project specifically, but I've done performance reviews, and I've had people been like not aware, like you're tracking these things, and then it's kind of like a gotcha moment, like, oh, well, I didn't know that, And so if you're not having a regular check-in with them, or a way of looking, or they can look and they can see where that is, to me that's a fail. Where we should be having a check-in and understanding where we're at in the process. Are we on target, off target? We've got to look at some metrics, and if and I know some people will get pushed back on that sometimes, but I think the people that push back, in my candid opinion, are not usually they're not usually getting the job done. And like, I don't want to be tracked, I don't want to be visible. But the more everybody leans into creating a culture of visibility and transparency, I think we all win in that ultimately. But just making sure that we're being mindful of that. So I want to as we're kind of I want to shift it a little bit here, and we've been talking a little bit about this, from not having to do micromanaging, but we've feel free to add in here as we're finding kind of this balance and effectively communicating with the team. And I liked your idea too of recognizing and rewarding the effort. Like how we've talked a little bit about this, but just want to delve deeper about building that supportive team environment, creating that culture. How have you guys seen that working well? Like your wow points, Charlie, I like that. And making sure that we're creating that members feel valued and supported and not a negative thing, because this idea of this is like, I'll give you an example too. It's not just in the company, but it's externally too. So I was talking to a client the other day. She's working on a project as working with a subcontractor, and she's like, how do I create an environment in which I don't want to be like nagging them, and like what is the frequencies I should be checking back on with them about this deliverable that they needed to get? Well, I asked them questions to clarify. Number one, I said, kind of like what we were talking about before, about beginning with the end in mind. I said, have you told them, like, when do you need this by? Or have you been very specific in like, I need it and this is what it looks like? And she's like, no, I just said kind of get it back to me when you get it done. Well, I said, well, you left it open-ended here. So it's bad for you and it's bad for them, because now they don't have a define like what's mine, and you're feeling like, oh, I'm anxious because I don't know like, do I ask again, or am I bugging them too? And what I've noticed is, I don't know if it's just the younger generation or something, but then there's people that just won't say anything. So I'm just going to be quiet. I'm just going to ghost you until somebody comes and knocks on my door, which I don't think that's stressful. If I'm waiting to hear back from you and I don't know what's going on, right? That's a to me, it's creating a negative environment. But they're like, well, no news is good news, kind of a thing. I'm like, well, I think you need to be proactive and at least give them an update, even if you're not done with it. So how do we continue to build a supportive team and environment? And we've talked a little bit about some of these things, but I'd love to go a little deeper, and I'll come to you, Bill, first, because I think you brought some ideas here. But how do we create some positive ways of interacting, building on what you said, like the checklist, or making sure that we're managing this team effectively? So you want to chime in there, Bill?
Sure. Well,
Yeah.
Of course, establishing your process at the beginning is certainly key, because if you don't, and then you change or you throw something into the mix, then later on, then it's just going to come as a shock, and it's not going to go over well. Charlie had some great ideas there, like the wow points. I did like that. Different incentivizations for different outcomes. Always, of course, making sure that you incentivize the right outcome.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to accidentally incentivize the wrong behavior. And really setting up systems and processes. Little doxy there, that allow your garden to weed itself. If you set things up right. One of my favorite stories about the garden weeding itself is actually about the band Van Halen. And they are notoriously well known for a particular addition to a rider to their contracts. And this rider in their contract said that if we go to do a concert for you in the green room where we wait to go on stage, there must be multicolored M&Ms, but no browns. No brown M&Ms. And it was always just assumed that this was just some high-strung band members, little quirk or something. But it turned out it was really genius, because they had a lot of high-tech, very potentially dangerous stage setups, and they knew that if the promoter couldn't be bothered to take out the brown M&Ms, then how could they trust the promoter to have the stage set up safely? And so if there were brown M&Ms, they just assumed that it wasn't safe to go on stage. They tear up the green room and leave. But yeah, and and we can find ways to do that. Finding little tricks to make sure that the job is getting done that needs to be done. And we can do that through rewards, through penalty, stick and carrot, if you will, various little things. Making sure, of course, that we find things that excite the people we're trying to excite, the people we're trying to get to do the job. Because money will work for one person, recognition for another, and neither the twain shall meet. So definitely there are ways to do it. That's I think the way I like best is get it to do it itself. Set up the systems to yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you can, that's a great plan. One of the things I wanted to acknowledge John, and I because I was working with John last year because he recognized, hey, how can I support my team in elevating it? And I really want to honor that, because not all business owners put that investment in their team and helping them more effectively work together. And I just think the more that we can get that outside of help, if you still have a doctor or a challenge, and saying, hey, let me get another voice. That's the other thing I've recognized, even myself, of like previous companies I worked with. I knew sometimes I wanted the staff to talk with me, but there was a barrier. They're like, they just felt like they couldn't talk to me. I know you, Charlie, you're shaking your head there too. So it was like, we brought in another outside consultant at another company, so that he would do interviews and feedback with the employees, so they could open up and say what's working or not working, right, in the communication realm. And so I think investing in that will pay dividends in the long run. But I think sometimes they don't want to see that. But John, I'd love to get your feedback on like how you've been encouraging your team and found success here in providing that team environment for communication and management.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. My first employee that I hired all the way back in 1996, I remember we went to an interview at a place called Eat at Joe's in Redondo Beach. And if you've ever been there, it's like a super loud breakfast restaurant. So I don't think I heard maybe half of the words he told me. I just was excited to have someone come work for me, very first employee, young engineer. And he came to work for me. And back then it was a pretty garage sort of operation. No frills, nothing nice like Charlie's office that I see in the background there. And after 2 weeks, he came to me on a Friday. Actually, it was funny because when I met him, he had a suit and looked great. By the end of the first week, start of the second week, I saw that his dress code kind of went down. And by the last day, he literally had ripped jeans on and a white T-shirt. And he came to me in the afternoon and he said, John, you know what? Or he said, well, he's being more polite. He said, Mr. Cruikshank, he said, I can't work here. And so my first employee that I ever hired for my company only lasted 2 weeks. So it was kind of humbling. But what I realized from there was that you want to make sure that people aren't sitting frustrated in their jobs and they have an opportunity to have people to communicate. That's one of the things that I find most important. And certainly now where it's kind of, more in the later part of my owning the company and potentially changing my career and becoming, an elected official with a full-time salary, I'm not available now either. And so the one thing I have available is I have 2 really great department heads that always have an open door policy, and I always see them speaking to the employees, and everyone has an opportunity to ask questions, because there's nothing more frustrating than being someone at a job and not really knowing what you're supposed to do and what the end game is, and not having a resource to find out. And you can write procedures manuals, and I've actually done that. And I read Sam Carpenter's Work the System, and I kind of in theory believe all that stuff. I think it's important. And, they talk about the difference between big companies and small companies. That big companies have procedures, and that's probably true. And, when you see big companies, you're always impressed because it's hard just to run a small company. Just imagine having 1,000, 2,000 employees. One thing else we do that I think is an interesting way to provide, provide some nice ways of giving someone an attaboy without having to give them huge bonus checks is we do monthly project or company status meetings. And engineers are traditionally introverted, as you can imagine. I'm one of the rare extroverted engineers. But most engineers, they just like to get at their desk and crank away. I'm sure Charlie has something similar with people that do cybersecurity. People that are highly technical usually aren't people that like to go out and give speeches. But one thing that we do, and it's an internal thing, but I have people that work in Kentucky. I have one that's in the Philippines, one down in San Diego. I've got an office in Santa Ana and one in Los Angeles. And so we're not all together in one office. But every month we all get on the teams, just like we are here right now. And everyone gets an opportunity just to tell us what they've been working on, what they've been doing, anything interesting they've found in their job. And anyone could talk about anything. And, typically I start and I break the ice and I'll talk a little bit about my campaign and I'll talk a little bit about, new projects that are potentially coming down the line and maybe a little bit about where the economy is going and some of the things that I know just so that they know that I'm still actually working. I'm sure sometimes they think, what's he doing? But then I get everyone an opportunity to give us a few minutes of what they're doing. And I think it helps everyone understand each other. Like, even though we don't see each other every day, we can all kind of respect each person's position and the importance to the organization and how each person is an important part of what we do and how we all need each other. And I think I think that helps to add fulfillment to people's careers. There's a lot of other things we do, but in fairness of time right now, I just wanted to share this anecdote of something that we do in our company.
Yeah, absolutely, John. And I've seen it firsthand, and you have a great team, and I'm glad to been a little bit a part of that. So
everyone loved you, David.
Thank you.
You were a crowd favorite with JMC Squared.
They're a great team, and it's really neat to see. It's neat to see them come together and support you, like you said, as you're going into this public office and knowing that. And that's, I think, really unique. Not everyone has that, but they know here's where John's going. How do we support him and make sure the company is running while he has to go out there and do that? I think it's so wonderful to see, honestly, yeah. And that's an ideal, a business owner's ideal is like, could they actually step away and let the business run and do its thing, right? That's the best delegation. And I can step in there, of course I'm there, but it can run. It's not dependent solely on me, right? So kudos to you too, John, for just creating that space and getting that team engaged. So as we're kind of wrapping up this tonight, and I appreciate you guys just sharing these. We've talked a lot about, the art of delegation. How do we do this without micromanaging them and creating this supportive team? I'd like just, and I'll come to you first, Charlie, and we'll come back around with Bill and John, and then I'll come to do final thoughts here. But, as we've looked back at that, maybe just some key takeaways or things that you felt, Charlie, you might want to reemphasize or that were brought, that come to mind here, key takeaways that you want to leave with the business owners that are listening to this. And I'll just put a call out to those that are listening to this podcast, or when you watch this and you leave comments. We love to hear your feedback here. So by all means, if you haven't already, put comments and give us your thoughts, please do so. And if you're finding value here and you're realizing, hey, what Charlie's sharing, or John or Bill or myself, please reach out to us. We're totally available. We want to hear from you. That's why we're coming on here, providing value and giving you feedback. Because if you feel like this is helpful for you, this is how we lead our businesses, this is how we lead ourselves. So with that, Charlie, I'll come to you, and we'll go back to Bill and John and wrap us up for the night. But Charlie, would you just give us your last key thoughts and takeaways here?
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's no matter what you do, whether it's external with your customers or internal, in this case with our episode here, it's a human to human business. So you want the greatest human need is to be seen, heard, and understood. So really check in with your folks. I love the huddles that you guys are doing, John. We do something similar, and just through those connections, we're able to uncover and discover what's meaningful. Like, we have majority of our help desk staff in the Philippines, and turns out really nice ergonomic chairs is what's gonna be a wow moment for them. So that's something we're working on to get all of them so that they can do their best work. And so we're thinking we may have a different idea of what it means to deliver wow to our people, but something as simple as a comfortable chair to sit in is all it takes. And so just make sure you're checking in and connecting and letting your people know that you care about them.
Mm-hmm. That's huge. Yeah. And we talked about that, Charlie, in our communication code episode about care, right? Celebrating people. So those of you that missed that episode, go back and check out the communication code. That was a fun episode. Bill, how about you? Final thoughts here.
It all starts with listening. Actively listening to your people. Finding out what makes them tick, how you can incentivize them, how you can disincentivize them. It all starts with listening.
Absolutely. Thanks, Bill. How about you, John? Final thoughts?
Well, first of all, it's been a real pleasure being with both Bill and Charlie. These two guys are super smart and their ideas are great. And I've been taking mental notes of things to do as well. So I love the idea of listening. I always tell people we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, use them proportionally. I think there's nothing greater than the joy of building a company and running a company, whether it's just yourself or whether it's 1,000 people. I love what Charlie was saying about the little things, just making sure that your employees are just comfortable, things like that. Don't forget about the little things. These are the sort of things that add up, and they mean a lot to your employees, and they mean a lot to your clients as well. Don't forget about those little things, and keep a smile on your face while you run a company. It's okay to make mistakes. We all make mistakes, and that's why we're having this discussion tonight, so we can share good things and bad things.
Yeah.
And thank you, David, for having me on.
Absolutely, John. No, it's a pleasure. Always glad to have you guys here to share the roundtable. I feel really honored to have you guys here. I listening, looking at those details. I agree with you, John. It's so rewarding to create a team, and that you it's a win together, lose together kind of mentality. Hey, we all can win together, and we all kind of the challenge is we're all affected this. But when you live that way, to me, it's very, very powerful, and it's attracting those people like you talked about, Charlie, that want to be a part of that. They're like, man, I want to be a part of this organization. I see where you're going, and I'm willing to put in the hard work because I know it's worth it. So I appreciate you guys all sharing your insights here. Thank you guys for listening and following along the podcast. Again, you can share this if it resonated with you. We appreciate you subscribing and liking and all that good stuff wherever you're finding us watching this or listening to it. We will be back again with future episodes, so continue to check back on the Business Roundtable podcast. On behalf of Bill, Charlie, and John, we really appreciate you guys listening. Have an amazing day. We'll talk to you later. Bye, all.
Great night, guys. Thank you.